Welcome to the second installment of Getting the Hobby Barn Built, where we look at the initial building stages and we'll also get to see what it looks like when someone tries to capture video for the first time. Spoiler alert, there will be some rather egregious abuse of time-lapse. Having never used it, there are some incredibly poor assumptions on what is captured every 5 seconds, every 1 second, and even every half second and then played back at a normal frame rate. But with that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish today. Now, I've already established approximate corners for the location of the shop and even moved some fill around the lot to bring up the level of the building. We do have a creek that runs through the property, and part of our red tape headache that I mentioned in the last video revolves around flood elevations. While existing grade is above flood elevation, we wanted to add a little extra margin for our worst-case storm. As a result, we are targeting the floor of the shop to be an extra 18 inches above existing grade. This allows for being able to slope the ground away and any water from the shop on all sides to reduce the chances of anything getting inside. Batter boards were placed so we could pull string lines at exactly the dimension of our outside wall framing. Essentially, we're recreating our master outline from the CAD sketch in the real world. Alila and I end up going around and measuring, tweaking, remeasuring, retweaking ad nauseum until the building outline is facing exactly how we want it to, and more importantly, making sure it's square. Taking the time and starting with a squared up outline will only serve to make every later step a little bit easier as measurements become more consistent and the trickier assemblies come together just that much more simply. You will see that much of this building ends up being accomplished by me, so having the advantage of a square starting point is important. With our string line in place and my CAD drawings in hand for reference, we were able to mark our locations for drilling our post holes. We rented a dingo with a 24-inch auger attachment to drill our holes, 19 holes in total. Some of you might be thinking, 24-inch columns are way overkill for that building. And you're absolutely right. However, one thing I factored in is that I'm the landowner doing the work, and the building inspector doesn't know me apart from any other potentially frugal owner-builder. By establishing with my first inspection that I'm willing to overbuild by some level, makes the inspection process much smoother. In a moment where I recorded in real time, you can see just how long it takes to drill a single hole. It's not a long process. As we went through, we learned to make better use of having the machine do most of the work. We kick some of the spoils back into the hole to have the auger do that removal, and simply tamp down the remaining bits at the bottom once we reach our target depth. We used a rotary laser to verify we had the same column height at each post, even though that might have meant slightly different depths from the surface. I also placed most of the removed materials towards the center of the building to continue raising the grade and reduce how much fill we had to bring in. This created a little headache moving the machine around, and there are definitely better ways to do this, but learning those lessons is part of the fun. Now, rental equipment does have pros and cons. As you'll see in a moment here, what happens when you trust that rental equipment is maintained well. Yep, that's the dingo running out of fuel, and me stupidly wondering what I did wrong with the machine. The fuel gauge says it's almost full, but in fact, it is fully empty. After an hour of trying to reprime the diesel fuel system following the manual, I was able to eventually get the machine running and finish the holes, but was frustrated enough that I failed to record that. I remembered to record again once we were cutting and placing our column forms. Anyone who has looked at sonotube type forms knows how absurdly expensive those are. So we sourced some long 12-foot forms and cut them down to length needed just to form above the surface and let the drilled holes form the remaining depth. If we had tried to use an entire 48-inch form to fill that hole with the same diameter as the auger, that would have been nearly impossible. But we used the laser again to keep the tops as close to the same plane as possible, and along with a basic level to ensure they were straight, simply pushed soil against the forms and held them in place. With those in place, it's time for concrete, and in a needlessly self-imposed rush to place concrete when that truck arrived, I forgot to hit record, so we pick up after the concrete truck has come and gone. Just over 8 yards of concrete placed to fill 19 holes, 48 inches deep, even though our frost depth is only 36 inches, but again, impress the inspector. And the extra yard of concrete helped avoid a short load fee, and the little extra material also helped us bring up the grade. Our luck was such that right as we were getting started on inserting our wet set brackets, our trusses arrived. Luckily, we were both on site and were able to divide and conquer, and now with those anchors in place, posts and trusses on site, all we had to do was wait for the curing process, and then we could start the fun part. Framing the walls began my first day of solo work. Wanting to avoid injury and work as safely as possible, I tried to utilize the machinery that was available to me to do most of the heavy lifting. Each of these posts weigh in at well over 100 pounds, and while I can manage that and lift that, their length makes them a bit unwieldy. I'm also using laminated columns, which are a stronger and straighter product than solid timber posts, and it does allow the pressure treating chemicals to soak into every layer of the column more deeply than if it were a solid post. This increases the durability and the longevity of these posts, but at the expense of some increased weight. Each post was marked with the location of wall-girt framing walls on some sawhorses and adjusted for the actual column elevation for that post's specific pier. This meant I could square up and assemble large sections of the wall while safely on terra firma, but still be really close to level and square when the walls were raised. Turns out that not being a professional builder means I lack some endurance swinging a hammer, so rather than watch me pause every few boards and for a few hundred nails while I build up these muscles, let's skip an hour ahead to the point where the walls are ready to be put up. While we have this mini excavator on site, I plan to utilize its reaching and lifting power to make everything a little bit easier. Hoisting these walls was a trivial task for this machine, as it's capable of lifting well over 8,000 pounds over the blade. This 750-pound wall was barely noticed as a load. Letting the machine hold the wall, all I had to do was plumb up the column and drill in some lag bolts to anchor everything down, going post by post to make sure each one was in the right plane. Here I had 20% of the building erected in the matter of minutes. While clearly manageable solo, I was happy to see reinforcements arrive before lifting the second side. As it happens, lifting from the inside of the building was a little trickier for the second wall, but still nothing overly dramatic. This time I had additional eyes and arms helping me ensure everything went up where it should be. I ran out of battery capturing the rear wall lift, but as you can see, it was a quick manual operation to put the last two posts in place and be ready to tie in the framing. Not bad progress from one day's work. Next, I'll need to finish tying in some more of the wall framing in those back corners and start hanging some trusses, but that'll have to wait for the next video. We'll see you there.